why she wrote When Rain Hurts, and give us a little bit of an update on where her family is today. And so, Mary, I will turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Emily, for this opportunity. And I'm frankly glad I'm not on video right now because my face is bright red from blushing from all your kind words. So I very much appreciate it. And thank all of you for attending this today. And of course, I'm very excited about the release of this book. I have to say I'm also a little nervous about it. I worry about how it will be received, interpreted, those sorts of issues. I have sort of laid it all out there for everyone to see and examine and hopefully draw some insight from, but also to criticize. And of course, some criticism can be constructive and should be viewed that way. I wrote this book because I wanted to put a face on FAS. I had read a lot about it before I adopted. I don't think anything I read even touched what it's like to actually raise an alcohol impacted child, exposed child. And so I felt a real desire to do something about that. That's the reason I wrote the book and decided if I was going to do it and I was going to do justice and respect the topic and the severity of this disability, then I had to be starkly honest, which meant just laying it all out. And of course, that was very hard, but I did it, and I think I was extremely honest, maybe to a fault sometimes. I don't know. I'll be interested to hear what you have to say about that. In terms of how we're doing now, one thing that I regret about where the book ended, and that was really just a question of it had to end somewhere, and the publisher needed it to be finished, really, because this is an ongoing story. Peter is doing very, very well now. He has been discharged from his residential school. He's back home with us 24/7, which is just a very joyful thing as far as I'm concerned. We've had challenges. We moved out of state the day after he was discharged. So, you know, our poor son, who doesn't like change, got discharged from a school he'd become very attached to, and he knew he was learned to be successful there. So that was a large transition. We moved out of state, another major transition. I went back to work full-time for the first time since we brought our children home in 2004. Another huge transition, and he began a new school. So we've thrown a lot at him the last few months, but he is doing really well. I'm extremely proud of him. I think he's proud of himself, and I see more for him now in his future than I think I really ever have. So, you know, we're all in a pretty good place right now, which is wonderful. So anyway, I'd like to hear questions, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Let's see. I guess some of our questions are, maybe we can start with a little bit of the Minnesota connection. And this is Emily speaking. I guess I noticed one of the early chapters about the reference to Dana Johnson, who, of course, being with MOFAS here, we know that his wife, Mary Jo Spencer, is one of our clinical nurses in our diagnostic clinic. And I guess I'm wondering if you have some advice for others on how to find affordable and really relevant providers and resources in your area, like the Dana Johnsons.
Right. Well, I started that work myself just on the internet, and that's where I came up with Jane Aronson's name, of course, and as well as Dr. Johnson. So, you know, that's always an easy place to start. And from there, I think organizations such as MOFAS and NOFAS the different chapters around the country that are popping up are just a tremendous resource. There are also FAS medical clinical practices popping up around the country. Long overdue, but very glad to see that as well. I mean, I understand there's one right here in Johns Hopkins by us in Baltimore. Unfortunately, for insurance reasons, we can't access it. They don't participate with our insurance. So that's a little disheartening. But those would be resources that I would suggest going to. Also, FRUA, Families for Russian Ukrainian Adoption, is a wonderful website and resource for prospective parents as well as current adopted parents. Can give a lot of insight and direction for those kinds of pre-adoption medical services.
Excellent. Another question is kind of getting alongside the international adoption. You had a lot of challenges along the way, and what advice do you have for families who are beginning the foreign adoption process? What kind of playing the Monday morning quarterback? Is there anything that you wish you would have done differently, or that you would say, oh, here is the best nugget of advice that I can give you starting this process?
Yeah, that's a complicated question, Emily, but one that certainly warrants thought. Playing Monday morning quarterback, I think my first and foremost advice is to always use your head and try not to lead with your heart. There's so much time for us to pour our hearts into our kids when it's all over. But I think examining, honestly, having an honest examination with yourself and your partner, if you have one, about what your expectations are, what you can handle, what you feel you can cope with, and what you can't cope with. I think that we as adoptive parents, and certainly in the stage of being prospective adoptive parents, really have to vet that and figure out what you can handle. Jane Aronson, who we used, who was our adoption pediatrician, said to me once, and I really appreciate it, because if you've read the book, you know that my husband, for instance, has been through quite a lot. He lost 2 sons in his first marriage, and he's had more than his fair share of heartache. And in talking to us one time, she said to us, not all parents are equipped to deal with all challenges. And, I think that's true. I think we think of ourselves as able to do anything when it comes to helping a child in need, and also wanting to have the opportunity to parent. But I think taking stock of what you can do and what you feel like maybe you're not able to do is very, very important. And the next thing I would say with regard to that is stick by your guns. It can be a very intimidating process, as many of you, I'm sure, appreciate. But the fact is, the Russian people want these kids to have homes. Other Eastern European countries want these kids to be placed, or they wouldn't be doing it. Of course, everything is different in Russia now, but I was a little intimidated by the process, which surprised me. I am an attorney, and I thought maybe that I'd have a little more tools in my toolbox. But when it gets down to it and you become emotionally involved, it is a place of vulnerability. So just be aware of that and try to protect against it and stick by your guns. If you have questions, if you need more information, if you're not sure, just insist on getting what you need to make the best decision for yourself and your family.
Nice. We have a question from Carolyn, who says, reading your book was like reading my life. I adopted my child out of the state foster care system, but went through many of the things that you did in dealing with behaviors and trying to find answers. And in respect to your honesty in the book, I appreciate it because it validated my experiences, both the challenges and the rewards. As you look back, are there things that you would do differently?
Hi, Carolyn. Thanks for your question. Well, I guess since our experiences have been so similar, I think you must know the answer. The answer is yes. There's so many things that I would do differently. And I try not to spend too many big sleepless nights thinking about that. I would have approached, knowing now what I know about our son, for instance, and the way that FAS impacts his life, his ability to think and process, his reaction to sensory stimulation. Now that I understand it better, I would have approached his behaviors much differently in the early years. We had no idea what was going on with him. He was, in many ways, just an out-of-control youngster in our home, and we could not tell what was setting him off, what would calm him down. We just couldn't get a handle on it, and it was terrifying. It's taken a lot of years for me and my husband to figure out what works with Peter, and it's taken a lot of years and a lot of help from other people, frankly. So one of the things that I would have done differently, first and foremost, is gotten help early on, listen to my intuition. No matter how many people told me to give it time, no matter how many professionals said, wait 6 months, it's an adjustment, he's been through hell and back, he needs time, you all need time. That was the last thing we needed. What we needed was help. So if you think you need help, then in all likelihood you do. And my suggestion would be to try to get it as soon as possible and really just insist on it.
Can you talk a little bit, Mary, about the idea of raising a child with an FASD can be really lonely, and sometimes friends are far and few between. And can you talk a little bit about your support network that you had in place? I know that you didn't have a lot of family close by. So where did you kind of get your strength, and what advice do you have for other people who maybe don't have family close by and that type of thing? Where are some other sources of support for you?
Sure, Emily. That's an extremely important support. I almost wish, frankly, that we had moved maybe back closer to my family, to Florida, or where my sister is in Atlanta, somewhere where I had a little more family support. We were lucky to have Pat's mother help us in any way she could, and she still does, but she's quite elderly, so there's a limit to what she can do, although she's always provided emotional support. We brought somebody into our home pretty early on when Peter was about 4. She was an ABA, VB behavioralist. She was actually still in graduate school at the time, but heading in that direction. A very gifted young woman named Lindy. And not only did she help Peter professionally with her professional skills and her training, but she was just a tremendous support to us and has become a very close member of our extended family. So that was a tremendous benefit to us, although it was also a very financially costly endeavor. And frankly, we've run out of funds to be able to do that kind of thing. It saved our sanity. It was worth it, and it helped Peter. But, that's another easy trap to go down, which is to throw every single dime you have into solving this problem. And it's such an urgency. We felt it was such an urgency. It was tearing all of us apart that we really had no choice. But, that's a cautionary tale. Be careful about that. The other thing to do is to reach out to what resources are available in your community. I didn't do enough of that early on. I'm still learning how to do that. It's hard to accept that you can't do it alone. At least it was hard for me. I felt like I should be able to solve this problem. I am Peter's mother, and it's my responsibility, and it's my husband's responsibility, and we should be able to tackle this. But that's just silly, and it's false pride, and the thing to do is to get as much help as possible. So I would reach out to your local ARC, to the FAS community if there is one in your area. That you're obviously there is in yours, which is wonderful. And I would reach out to therapists, a teacher that you trust, church, neighbors, anyone that can help. I mean, as I said in the book, and I mean this, and it's absolutely true, and many of you know this, of course, is that dealing with a disability like this is a very isolating thing. People outside what I call the four corners of our family, it's difficult for them to understand what we're coping with. I mean, they see our son out in public, at a soccer game, at the movie theater, and he's smiling, and he sings, and he's happy, and he's a beautiful boy, and it all looks wonderful. And they don't get a glimpse of how bad it can turn, and how quickly it can turn, and that this beautiful smiling child can, if circumstances are right, turn into someone in a rage that can last for hours. So it's difficult. People don't really understand, unless they're in the home and around you a great deal, the extent of really the challenges that raising a child like this brings to the entire family.
Along those lines, Mary, we have a question from Lisa who says, did you have difficulty with your children getting into dangers, like items that weren't safe for them to play with, and choosing those versus toys? Were there things that you used to keep them safe, as well as what feels like a 24/7 supervision? Lisa goes on to say that it's exhausting being on every day, all day. Her situation is they have adopted 4 children through the foster care system. All are affected with an FASD. They also have 2 by birth. So they are an extremely busy household and have often chaos reigns even in a 2-parent household. So being patient on a daily basis is definitely a challenge. And she asks if you have any special strategies that you would share with us.
Wow, Lisa, you have your hands full. God bless you. That is tough. We can barely manage one alcohol-exposed child. What strategies have I used? I've used a lot through the years. Having eyes on Peter at all times, as I'm sure you appreciate, is important. I mean, he has a very difficult time regulating his behavior, his emotions, certainly has a hard time regulating his impulses. So keeping him safe and out of harm's way is always a top priority and a challenge. You know, some of the things that I've done through the years, when he was very little, if I had to be out of his sight, I would actually, for instance, to take a shower or just use the restroom, I would have him sit against the door so I knew where he was. I could hear him and sort of feel him against the door. We've moved beyond that, thankfully. There was a time when we had a sort of chirping alarm on his bedroom door at night, so that we would know that if he got up and started getting himself into mischief, which, you know, we had some close calls with that. He's broken into medicine cabinets, that kind of thing. We have an alarm on our house now, mostly because we've moved back into a dense metropolitan area from the country and just want to make sure that we're safe. But also with an eye toward, you know, Peter getting older. He's 12 now. And so if he tries to leave the house, we'll hear that chirp at night. and he's not going to have the code. What else have we done? We still keep our knives out of reach, not because he's violent or that we fear that he's going to hurt us, but that's something he could reach to play for still at 12 and get himself hurt with. So we have to keep things like that out of reach. We've just taken a lot of precautions like that. I still have the child lock on the doors because, especially when he's angry, he'll try to exit the car while it's moving. He hasn't done it much anymore, but he did it about 3 weeks ago, so we had to start doing that again. He can be very impulsive toward his sister and very quick to anger, so we have to be very careful not to allow him to be around her too much without an adult present. We have to protect her against that because he will sometimes, strike out at her, and he's pretty strong and he's much bigger than she is. And although my brother sort of, whooped on me when we were kids, he was neurotypical, and like most big brothers, knew when to stop, knew when it was going to go too far and he could actually hurt me. Peter doesn't have that off button, so we have to do a lot of protections like that. I'm trying to think what else we've done. We just take a lot of safeguards. Basically, the kind of safeguards you would have for a very young child, a toddler in your home, are still present in ours. When we first brought our kids home, neither one of them, for that matter, they've been in an orphanage, had any idea that a stove was hot, that toilets were for flushing and not a toy, they weren't actually a toy, that there was hot water. They had to be taught all of those things, so it was certainly a challenge, and it still is in many, many regards.
Mary, we have some other comments from some of the other participants that say that they can certainly appreciate how you included writing about the effects of siblings living in the house. Many of them have non-FASD kids in the home as well. So, and they talk about how frequently outsiders don't understand and sometimes question the parenting decisions that they make. So I think that really hits kind of a little bit of a, something that a lot of people are feeling. So I don't know if you want to elaborate on that or if you want to go to another question.
Yeah, I can. I don't know about the rest of the participants in this call, but one of the things my husband and I have really struggled with is how to meet equal justice with our kids. Peter, we have a lot more limits in our house than we would have if we had two neurotypical children. There's no doubt about it. And so often our daughter, who doesn't need such stringent limits, I think, bears some of the brunt of it. It's hard to have two standards, one for Peter and one for her. He doesn't understand that. It makes his emotional lability more wild, and he thinks it's unfair. And at the same time, having the same rules for Sophie that exist for Peter aren't fair to her. She deserves to have more freedom and more responsibility. And it's not a question that Peter's being disobedient. He just isn't developmentally ready for it. So it's tough because we've got a 12-year-old who wants to be treated like he's 14, but he's really sort of emotionally, developmentally, socially 6 or 7. And then we have an 11-year-old who is 11 and acts like she's 11. So that is a huge challenge in our house, as I'm sure it is for many others. And I often worry about our daughter because I think that things are tough for her in so many ways, but that's one of them. I don't know what the answer is to it, though.
Yeah, we've got a lot more questions than answers right now, don't we? But we do have another question a little bit further down the line here in your situation. But you talked a lot about the difficulty it was in making that decision to place Peter in residential care. And what advice can you give on helping other parents through that process?
Wow. That's a tough one. I was extremely resistant to putting Peter in residential care. In all honesty, my husband was there before I was, and rightly so. It's funny, when the book came, and of course I started sort of skimming through it again, I realized how much I'd touched on it in the early years of writing the book, and obviously this idea that Peter might need residential placement at some point was always in my head and something that worried and concerned me. The last thing that I wanted to do was bring a child home from a Russian orphanage, from having spent the first 3 years of his life in an institution, and then put him in another one. I mean, that was absolute anathema to me and felt like failure. There's no doubt about it. That's the most difficult thing I've ever had to do. Now, having said that, I also have to say that it saved our family, and it may have saved him. He needed that 24/7 supervision, that constant programming, the constant reteaching, revisiting, going over what worked, what doesn't work, what you can do differently next time. He just needed that kind of immersion and indoctrination to help organize his brain and help him move past some of the chaos that was inside of his brain. I think that we brought him far, and I think we brought him as far as we could alone. So how do you know when a child needs residential? Well, I'm not sure, because other people got me to that point. I honestly I wouldn't have done it on my own. I was pushed into doing it. But like I said, it was a mistake for me to be thinking that way, because it is what he needed. And so looking back on it, where were we? Well, I could barely leave the house. Peter came home from school every day, absolutely raging. I mean, he just walked in and raged and didn't really stop until we got him in bed. He was miserable. Our daughter was absolutely falling apart. We had nailed his window shut because he had tried to jump out a second-story window. We had removed everything from our garage that could hurt someone or something, because he had taken to bashing things and others. So, I think when you get to the point where you can't guarantee the safety of the members of your family, and or you're afraid your child's going to hurt himself seriously, then you've got to look at that. You've got to say, whatever you're doing at home, right or wrong, whether it's the absolute best you can do or not, is not working, and something more is needed. So that's another place where I think that you just have to be willing to have a very honest conversation with yourself and separate what you want and what you hope for from what the reality is. And then I'll add to that is, to me, putting Peter in residential was admitting failure. And boy, on the other side of that now, I can say that that was just not the right way to think about it. It wasn't admitting failure. It was admitting that he needed more intensive help. and he got it. And he happened to go to an amazing school, and we've built relationships with people at that school that I think will last our lifetimes. And it was an amazing part of our journey and an incredibly restorative part of our journey. I didn't expect that at all. But that's the way it's turned out for us anyway, at least so far. And I'm very optimistic that we are just going to continue to be growing and moving forward. So that's how I can answer that difficult question.
Yeah, that was a doozy. Can you talk a little bit about, at one point when you were talking about Peter in school, you said Peter learns differently, certainly, but he can learn. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what you think schools can do to better help kids like Peter be more successful?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in this field. I'm just a parent, and a parent who has done a fair amount of reading on the subject. But our FAS kids, they have memory problems, they have processing problems, they have cause and effect problems, other executive function problems. Many of our kids are easily overstimulated in a noisy, busy, visually chaotic setting. I mean, even classrooms that are decorated and look wonderful, collages hanging down, artwork on the wall, posters of presidents on the wall, bright fluorescent lights, all of those things are just bombarding the brains of children with FAS and just making them scream on the inside. I know that's that way for our son. So I think in a lot of ways, we as parents of children with FAS and educators who work with children with FAS can borrow a lot from an autism model. Autistic interventions with some tweaking more or less work with children that have FAS. Classrooms should have natural light. There should be low visual stimulation. Walls should be blank and painted in neutral color. They shouldn't be too loud, too busy. Kids, FAS children need constant repetition of material broken down into much smaller increments of learning than the typical child. They need to be retaught and checked for comprehension, and then checked again the next day and the next week to see if they still know what they knew on Tuesday, if they still know it Thursday, much less a month from Thursday. And Peter, I don't know about your kids, but I think it's pretty typical of kids with FAS. Peter is very different on any given day in terms of what information he can access, what he can retain, how logically he's thinking. And so it really takes a good bit of repetition, of checking for comprehension, rechecking, taking lots of sensory breaks, and a very quiet, underwhelming environment for these kids. And unfortunately, that is not typical of a public education classroom. And it certainly isn't typical of an inclusion model. So although I'm generally in favor of inclusion, I don't think it works for all FAS kids. I think if a teacher's working with you, they can usually... Hello? Are we still there?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. Anyway, so, I think it's tough. Peter cannot be successful in a general education classroom, even with intensive special education supports. It's just too loud, too crowded, too noisy. too much going on for him, and it impacts his sort of mental stability. But I think some kids can be successful in that regard, but keeping down the stimulation and focusing on breaking things down into small lessons with a lot of reteaching and checking that the information has been retained is of paramount importance.
Another question is, where do you see your children in the future, and do you feel that they will require lifelong assistance or supports?
Well, I'm not going to talk about our daughter too much. I mean, she's, I certainly alluded to it in the book, that she has some challenges, not the same brand as Peter's, and I have the same hopes and dreams for her that I do for our son, and that we all have for our children. So focusing back on Peter with regard to that, we were told when he was 4 or 5, when we first got some of his issues diagnosed, that he was never going to live on his own, that he would always require 24/7 care, that he probably would not be able to hold a job, certainly wouldn't drive, a lot of wouldn'ts. And although I think realistically some of that, it probably holds true, I'm not willing to say that too much anymore about what he can't and won't do. Excuse me. He's doing more today than anybody ever said was possible. And as many of you know, I hope you know, FAS kids seem to come into themselves late. They mature late. So although, a typical youngster may have reached a level of maturity at 18, or it may be 25 for our FAS kids. So, Peter's going to be a late bloomer, I think, but I don't know what he's going to be able to do. I'm very optimistic about his opportunities. He is welcome, of course, to live with us as long as we are able to do that. And if that's something that he wants, I'm certainly planning on that. He may need some assistance. In fact, I'm guessing he will, but he may surprise us. In terms of driving and that kind of thing, I don't see it right now, but I didn't see when he was 6 him doing what he can do today. So, I'm just going to have to wait and see what he proves to us he can do as he matures.
There's another question from another Mary, actually, who would like to have you talk a little bit about some of the medications that you use to help stabilize Peter, and just kind of in general, what are some of your thoughts on meds?
Okay, sure. Hi, Mary. That was a major issue for us, as I'm sure it is for those of you who have gone down that path already or are currently thinking about it. We spent quite a long time debating and worrying about whether to medicate Peter, to start down that road of medication, for all the reasons that we as parents always talk about. What is it going to do long term? Is it going to impact his brain development, his physical development, all of those things. And we finally agreed to put him on a small dose of Risperdal, which is an antipsychotic medication that's commonly prescribed, to kids with FAS, but also very popular in the autism world. And it was night and day for us. I mean, it the change in him was just remarkable, and it was practically overnight. Now, it didn't stay as absolutely remarkable as it was right at first. And as so often happens, you know, we had to keep adding to it. And Peter's on a very complicated cocktail of medications now. I'm not thrilled about it. I get a little hit almost every night when I take his huge bag of medicine out and get his nightly medicine and morning meds ready. However, I've come to accept the fact that Peter cannot function without significant stabilizing medications in his system. And to rob him of that chance to function, I think, as a parent, is less fair than the risks and the worries that we face about giving him the medication. So for us, the benefit absolutely outweighs the risk. The couple of times we've taken him off medication for different reasons, always medical ones, but that we've taken him off. I mean, it's so obvious that he needs these medications in his system to help stabilize his brain function and give him a chance to be the best that he can be, you know, in our world. So, you know, my view on medication, I guess it's a love-hate relationship. I mean, Peter's always going to have to be on medication. At 12, we're starting to talk to him about that. He's always accepted the fact that he's on medication as really just a fact. We've tried to present it that way. We talked to him that, you know, if he had diabetes or something else, he would take medication and we wouldn't think anything of it. And this isn't any different. He has a problem in his brain and he needs to take medicine to treat it. But he's starting to resent it sometimes now. He's starting to realize that when he's had a bad stretch of behavior, we change his medication. He's seeing that relationship. So part of what we have to think about is going forward is how do we frame that for him? Because I worry, you know, like as happens with so many young adults and older adults too, is that medication is viewed as something that is resented, that they don't want that intrusion in their life, that they shouldn't have to need it. And then people stop taking it, and there are very dire consequences to that, as I'm sure we can all appreciate. So, you know, that's sort of where I am now, where I've been on medication and what the focus of my worry about it is becoming.
So kind of in follow-up to that, Mary, so it sounds like you have openly had conversations with your kids about FASD. And, like, at what age do you recommend talking to both perhaps the child who's affected as well as maybe siblings about how they might have different challenges than, you know, maybe other kids or other siblings in the family?
Right. I think we first started talking to Peter about it in what we hoped were developmentally appropriate ways when he was, I don't know, probably about 7. He started making some overtures to us that let us know that he was, you know, that he was starting to feel bad about himself, that his disabilities were impacting his self-esteem and how he really felt about himself. And so, you know, my husband and I talked about it. We talked about it with his therapist and Lindy, our home teacher. And, you know, we felt that he had a right to know that, you know, that yes, some of his behaviors are certainly bad. Of course, we've always tried to distinguish between bad behavior and a bad person. You know, Peter's never been well, he's the opposite of bad, but, his behaviors can be challenging. But, we felt like he deserved to know that this wasn't just a choice for him, that this was a problem in his brain. He wasn't just making bad decisions and bad choices as a kid, that he had a problem in his brain that he couldn't help, and that the focus needs to be on how do we address those problems in the brain, how do we work around them, how do we move past them, how do we accommodate them. And so we started introducing that to him. There is a book, I wish I remembered the name of it, something about Frankie, an FAS. If you Google it, it's on Amazon. It's a children's book about having FAS, which I found helpful. We read to both the kids. And then when Peter went to Green Chimneys, he was 9. They spoke very frankly about it with him. It helped that there were other children there with FAS. So it was interesting because he would come home on the weekends and he just started sort of speaking about it matter-of-factly, that, I have FAS. And so, we've continued that dialogue. I mean, what's, for us, the tricky part is having that awareness that came from him, not when he was younger, but it is now, that his birth mother drank while he was pregnant, and that sense of loss that he feels because of that. And that's a little more complicated. And also a work in progress. And we're just trying to help him with that and talk about how, good people can make bad decisions and, those kinds of discussions, because I don't want him I want him to be able to forgive his birth mother, who he doesn't know. She's in Russia. But I want him to hopefully reach a place where he can forgive that and move on with his life. So, again, part of this is just issues, he's growing up, and so we have to anticipate what some of those hurdles are. When he gets a little older, the anger over the fact that he has FAS may increase. I mean, we're seeing signs of that, the unfairness, the injustice, and he has a right to feel that way. It's just a question of, does that want to be the focus of his thoughts, as opposed to, because we can't change it. I'd rather have him focus on how do we move forward, knowing that this is in our lives.
Maybe just as we begin to kind of wrap up here today, Mary, you can just give us, again, as a parent, but just your kind of perception on, the stigma that's attached to this issue, and your opinion about how do we go about changing this in our society, and how do we, what can we do to change the social norm around drinking during pregnancy?
Yeah.
What would you do?
Well, that's a big question, and one that should be on all of our minds, obviously. Well, I think the first thing that would be helpful is if the medical community was 100% on board with this. I mean, there really is no medical debate in the literature about what alcohol does to a developing fetus. And, whether a woman has a glass of wine now and then when she's pregnant, whether her child is impacted or not, depends on so many factors, including the physiology, the susceptibility of the baby itself. And you can't predict that. So, yes, are there women out there who get away with having a little bit to drink and their children are perfectly fine and may go on to go to medical school or law school or, be an amazing dancer or carpenter or whatever, of course. But the risk is there. So, I mean, that's the first thing is I think we have to, as parents and a voice in this community, is really launch a campaign that, like Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, it says there's no amount of alcohol that's safe, and you're playing with fire, and the repercussions are damning and permanent, and it just isn't worth the risk. So I think that's the first thing that has to happen. I think the second thing that has to happen is that doctors have to get over their own trepidation about discussing this with their patients. It's difficult to talk about the use of substance with patients. I'm sure it's very difficult, whether it's alcohol, smoking, or drugs, especially with a pregnant woman. But I think that it should be part of prenatal care is going over the exact risks and putting a face to it. What does it mean? This is what can happen to your child if you drink while you're pregnant. And do you really want to live the rest of your life with this potentiality? And do you want your child to have to live with it? So I think doctors can play a very large role in educating their patients about this. And then last, we have to reach our most vulnerable part of our society too, which are those that don't have meaningful access to health care, and the young and the disadvantaged, and who, like many of the mothers in Russia, who have that sense of hopelessness that no matter what they do, is not going to make a difference. And we've got to reach that group too. But I really think sort of education and just blanketing with media and marketing the fact that this is a very dangerous road to be traveling is really the only way to go about it. And I think we're making strides, but boy, is there a long way to go.
Well, I would agree with that. I think maybe one last question here. One of the quotes in the book that I thought was particularly just beautiful was, you said, in the end, the real triumph of this story is that I reached Peter's heart. And can you just tell us a little bit about how you are doing today as far as your feelings of guilt and juggling work and being a mom and this whole concept of having to reshape your dream of motherhood, and just how is Mary Greene doing these days?
Thanks, Emily. Well, I'm doing really well. It's funny that you asked that because last night after dinner, we were downstairs in the basement playing ping pong with the kids, and there was a music box that my father used to. It's a little wooden box with a dancing clown on it, and it has that song da 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 boom dia, and he used to wind it up for me every night, and I love that little music box, and I keep things. It's just part of me. Little things that have sentimental value. And it was in the basement on a shelf, so I wound it up, and it was playing, and Peter got teary-eyed. And I said, Peter, what's wrong? And he didn't want to tell me, and then finally he did. And the gist of it is that I had given him that music box and told him, that it had been mine, it was very special, and I wanted to give it to him when he was, I don't know how old he was, 5 or 6. And like so many things, he kind of destroyed it. He wrecked it. He pulled it apart and he broke a lot of the pieces. And, and there was a time when he would do that very deliberately to my things. It's in the book, but he threw away my engagement ring, and he's just done a lot of sabotaging in the early years. And he said, and I said, well, Peter, that was a long time ago. and we don't need to focus on that. And I said, and I was able to fix the music box, and it's playing now, and we're enjoying it. And he said, yes, but it reminds me of how mean I was to you, Mom. And, you know, this is going to make me cry right now again, but, you know, we're both sort of sobbing at this point. And I said to Peter, you know, none of that matters. You know, you weren't being mean to, you know, I told him you weren't being mean to me. I said you were a child in a lot of pain and needed help from your mom and dad, and it just took us all a while to figure out how to do that, to get you that help. I said, so you have nothing to feel bad about. And, of course, I gave him, you know, that kind of very heartfelt pep talk after that. But, you know, the first couple of years we had Peter home with us, I was such a deer in the headlights. I mean, I was like, oh, my God, what have I done? I wish I could take this back. I wish I had never gone down this road. This is going to be how it is for the rest of my life, and I'm miserable. And I feel really guilty for having these feelings. And, you know, I have great sympathy for the parents who don't find their way beyond that. And I know some of them, and I have great, great sympathy for them. And I don't think it's for lack of trying on their part. But I was very fortunate. Peter and I found our way to each other. And I discovered that he wasn't this crazy, maniacal, feral child. He may have been acting like that, but, you know, there was this beautiful boy inside with this beautiful soul. I mean, he's one of the kindest people I have ever met, and I don't doubt that my thoughts on that will ever change. So, you know, how am I doing? I'm doing wonderfully because I know that now, and I almost didn't. So I almost didn't get to know that.
Well, what a great way to end it with such a beautiful just message of hope and on such a positive note. So thank you, Mary, for your time and your insight today and for sharing a story that I know probably a lot of other people online right now are relating to. And just thank you for putting a voice to this issue and for sharing a little piece of your life with us. We really, really do appreciate it. And best of luck with your book. I will selfishly plug it for you. If anybody has bought their book on Amazon.com and you want to go and do a review for Mary, I know she would really appreciate it. So anyway, with that, we will wrap things up. We are putting this online, so if people want to come back and re-listen to it for any, you know, just a boost and a lift me up, that will be available, as well as you can share it with others that weren't able to join us today. So thank you, Mary. You're part of the MOFAS family now, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Well, thank you so much. This has been such a great honor for me. It means the world to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Goodbye, everybody.
You too. Bye-bye.